everyone, and welcome to Superhero Rewind Unscripted. I used the wrong logo again. Uh, Austin. Anyway, I'm Captain Logan. Joining me tonight is Austin, the Day Ghost, who has been my sidekick on the Superhero Rewind commentary project. We're going to go back and do an old kind of unscripted, off-the-cuff show, not watching a movie tonight. We'll do another one of those next week. The next movie on the docket is the 1994 Shadow movie, which I haven't seen in probably over a decade, so I'm really looking forward to watching that. And Austin has never seen that, so I'm excited to see what he thinks of it.
Yeah, it's going to be something.
This is an idea I've had for a long time. I've always wanted to do in some capacity. I thought about doing this as a scripted show a long time ago, and there's a part of me that at some point would still love to do that. I kind of write a I don't know, sort of abridged history of superhero movies. But knowing me, it'd be like 100,000 words, and it wouldn't be abridged at all. And it'd be like everything under the sun I could think of, and it would be novel length. But I don't know, maybe someday I'll do something real polished on this, and this will end up being sort of like a rehearsal for it. But I thought it would be kind of a fun experiment to do a short podcast series where Austin and I go through the kind of bowels of our memory and go all the way back to the beginning and try to lay out as complete of a history of superhero movies as humanly possible. So we didn't do any extra research for this. This is not planned. We didn't, scour the internet and watch a bunch of special features right before sitting down. This is a thing that, of course, I've had a lot of my career devoted to for the last 14 years. I know the subject pretty well. Austin knows the subject pretty well also, and there's a lot of stuff that he brings up frequently that I either have forgotten about or never realized. Like, I learn a lot about this very subject talking to Austin all the time. So between the two of us, and particularly with like unmade movies, stuff that almost happened, and then sometimes a lot of background of movies that I don't know as well, and that sort of thing. And so I feel like if the two of us putting our heads together, we should be able to come up with a pretty cool kind of overall history of superhero movies. And we're going to do this an hour at a time, so I do have the timer on the screen there, and I'm going to get that started here in a second when we officially begin, and then we're going to stop wherever we're at an hour, and the next time we come back and do this, probably 2 or 3 weeks from now, we'll start wherever we left off. Austin, and like, we have not really even put together real serious concrete rules for this. The only thing we decided was we'll go pretty much linearly. Is that still cool with you, Austin?
Yeah, it's good with me.
If we kind of start at wherever we decide is about the first superhero movie and kind of go decade by decade. But I think what we should allow ourselves to do, because I don't want this to just be, and then this year or thereabouts, how well we'll remember our dates, because we're not going to look up anything as we go. We are going to rely on you guys, the commenters, watching live a little bit. If there's something that you think that we should insert in our discussion that we're not bringing up, feel free to throw it in there, and we'll use that to do as much cheating as we'll do. So if there's a name we can't think of, if there's a date we get wrong, Austin, let's not waste any of our hour looking it up ourselves. Let's just see if the commenters throw it in, and we'll get it in there if a commenter mentions it, and we'll make sure that that we get those read. Hayden Spring says a thesis paper. Yes, this will be the half-assed version of said thesis paper, and then maybe sometime down the road I'll actually write one, and it will probably be very much based on this, and I'll have to give Austin credit for it.
So if you go back for your doctorate in English, I have to be credited as being the nurse.
Yeah, can you imagine if I got a doctorate in English? By the way, I have no interest in wasting the money to do that. But if I went back to school and I got my doctorate in English, can you imagine if that was my thesis?
There's a bunch of superhero movies that done got made.
Yep.
Let me tell you about them.
They sure did. Like 80% of them in the last 2 decades.
Yep.
Bob the Hun put in a $5 super chat that I could save for the discussion. I think I'll go ahead and read it now. He says, if they still had movie serials in the 60s, would there be Marvel movie serials, and would they be good? Imagine a Spider-Man movie serial or Thor, and Daniverse says they'd probably look cheap. I mean, it's hard to give a good like what if response to that, because you had television, so there wouldn't have been any real good reason for movie serials at that point. It probably would have just been a TV show. So I mean,
yeah. Well, I think I'm trying to remember exactly because it's been a while since I listened to this. But there, in one of Mark Millar's first YouTube interviews that he did on his channel, he does Jerry Conway, and I think that's who it is. And he talks about how Stanley signed over a lot of that stuff like really early on.
Yeah.
To a guy who basically just took the money and went, "I'm gonna hold on to this so you can't make any money because I've already been paid." And it was like one of those kind of scammer type situations. So I want to say it would have fallen into that. So it probably would have been the late 60s, like with I think the Spider-Man cartoon's like 67. So it would have been late too. So they wouldn't have been right on that.
Yeah. But, if he hadn't messed up and sold it to the wrong people, you certainly could have had, I think, potentially very popular Marvel TV or theatrical things in the 60s.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. No,
whether they looked a little cheap or not. And it would have been the time to strike, strike while the iron's hot when Batman was so popular. And then the big question is, would you go camp or would you try to create a contrast and do something a little bit more serious and take that sort of risk?
Yeah, absolutely.
But here we are already in the 60s.
Yeah, which is the beginning of my knowledge of this stuff, because I think the earliest thing I've seen is 66.
Yeah, and I don't think we're going to spend very much time on anything before that, but we'll put in, kind of footnotes and just bring up a couple things right at the beginning. It'll basically just be, there were serials, and now we'll move on to the theatrical things we know about.
Movies, some Shadow movies.
Well, no, we haven't started the clock yet. Don't do that.
Oh, no, I swipe that.
Because that's all I'm going to say.
I request for that to be strucken from the record.
So again, did you just say strucken?
Yeah.
Okay, so I was just about to say
strucketh that from the record.
I'm about to say this is going to be very laid back and informal. So look forward to it, folks. This will be a real fun, silly podcast, and I mean, I say silly. We're gonna not go off on tangents if we can help it, and we're gonna kind of nose to the grindstone, but we'll have a good time with it too. And Austin, what I was gonna say about going linearly is I do think if at any point. Like I think we should just go where the wind takes us a little bit. Like if at any point it seems natural to kind of run through a franchise and deal with the like kind of evolution, rise and fall of a franchise, we can always like put a pin in whatever part of the history we're in. Whatever year, whatever decade we're in, and then come back to it later. I think there's places where it might make sense to do that. And I think we're likely
stuff like Superman and Batman. It's easier to talk about them
all together,
and not even like all of them. But like when you talk about '89, you're probably going to talk about all four.
Yeah.
Of those. Yeah.
Ninja Turtles is like that. Fantastic Four is like that. I feel like some of these franchises, it's kind of easier to talk about all of it together.
Mm-hmm. The Raimi trilogy.
Because I'm a little bit worried if we just go decade to decade, we're going to miss something huge and go, why didn't we remember to talk about that? There's a lot of different ways, certainly, that we could have organized this, too, right? Like, you could do 2, 3, 4 shows on just Marvel. And the same thing with just DC. Or even just Batman, really, but like just DC, and then you could do a whole couple of shows just on independent stuff, so you don't accidentally forget to bring up like Watchmen or V for Vendetta or whatever it is.
You still mentioned DC things before you get that actually.
No, comment. That's true. When I say. But I would have lumped it all together. Like it's not actually independent, but what I really mean by that is like DC Universe, Marvel Universe, and everything else is probably how I would have organized it.
I'm covering your back before you get the actually comment.
I appreciate it. Austin's always got both hats on because he was watching the channel for so long before he was on the channel that he's still will go back and forth and be like, I'm gonna be a viewer now, Cap. That's dumb. You shouldn't have forgotten that.
Yeah, maybe delete this stream.
Yeah, delete it now. Let's start over.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's do it another day when we're not tired and actually plan something. But no, I just wanted to see how well we would do with something like this, like completely impromptu and off the cuff. All right, Austin, are you ready, sir?
I'm good to go. Let's do it.
Let's see how far in.
Play that funky music, white boy.
Let's see how far we get in just an hour. And again, feel free to help us out in the comments, folks. Super chat or otherwise, we'll read as much as we can as we go. And here we go. I almost said everybody press play. I'm going to say press play.
Now.
Austin, what is, to your understanding or recollection, technically the first theatrical superhero movie ever made?
I'm not sure. I noticed in the comments, Chewbacca's lover corrected me because there is one before 66 that I've seen, and we did a commentary on it, and it's Superman versus the Mole Man. In terms of what the actual first one is, though, it's probably one of the Zorro. No, it's like a Lone Ranger or Shadow thing, I think. From what I remember putting together the list for eligible movies.
Yeah, so that is true with Lone Ranger. Maybe even a Zorro thing predates it. I'm not sure, but that is true with Lone Ranger for talkies. But technically, and does not, of course, have to be adaptation. Technically, as far as I understand it, the first superhero movie would almost undoubtedly have to be the silent film Zorro.
Oh, okay.
Which is early 30s, I think. Is it? I think it's that early, and it's been a very long time since I saw that. I saw that in college, and I've always wanted to do a rewind on that, partly just for the novelty of talking about something that old. And then after that, you go back and forth, and you get into some Zorro and Lone Ranger things, and then you have serials. And then in amongst that, you have Superman and the Mole Men, and then I think the other theatrical Superman thing that was that also Kirk Allen? Was blending together some serials. I think that's right, and wasn't made just as a film itself. Yeah, Mask of Zorro, 1920. Thank you, Daniverse.
Oh, okay. This is like, I think of as the like proto-superhero movie stuff, even stuff like 66, where it's like this is the beginnings of the genre.
Yeah.
And then you have Superman with Richard Donner that kind of cements like, okay, this is it. It's kind of like if you were to put it in horror terms, like there are slasher movies that predate it, but Halloween is kind of the one that like cements it.
Yeah, and when I've thrown around the term proto-superhero, I'm usually talking about, like, I completely agree with you. I'm usually talking about pulp heroes that aren't technically superheroes, because, you know, we're always kind of quibbling
like
over the semantics of that. Yeah, Flash Gordon, and I'm still trying to decide whether we should do that on the commentary project and count that for Rewind. But you have things like that. You have things like the Shadow. For a long time, I kind of went back and forth on whether Zorro even really counted as a superhero. These days, I do definitely think of him that way. And you know, things like the Phantom is. And
Doc Savage.
Yeah, and things that like the Rocketeer is based on. You know, that kind of stuff.
It's your old pulp heroes.
But so anything that's an actual superhero that gets a movie adaptation before 78, I still certainly think as a full-fledged superhero movie. But you're right, because it's before we think of this at all as a genre. And it's weird because you would have like spoofs and parodies and knockoffs of superhero movies before you even had really had like an onslaught of them, before people really thought of superhero as its own thing, as opposed to you know, kind of kiddie fare that just fit in the standard action genre. And so I imagine like as Superman is coming out, you know, people are thinking like, we've had superhero movies before, but there aren't very many at that point. So it feels like it should be a genre, but we haven't done a lot with it yet.
Yeah, and it lays the foundation that like everything moving forward will look back at,
Yes.
whether they know it or not.
But I do want to talk briefly about some things that come out before that, of course.
Absolutely.
And obviously, Richard Donner's Superman is going to be the big signpost, the big foundation that everything's going to look at after that, and then Batman '89 arguably is going to do that again. And as we go along, we'll kind of touch on what I think of as like the key issues of superhero movies that are super influential after that. The most influential thing for the genre before that is arguably Adam West Batman, just because that's what people think of when they think of superhero adaptation for anything that comes out between 66 and 78, and really up to 89, because all anybody's thinking of with Batman up until that point, and up especially until you get like Dark Knight Returns with Frank Miller and stuff, is Bam Pow Zap, all of that. And so Superman changes the game for ostensibly, eventually it's going to change the game for the idea of making more superhero movies, but we still think of it as like silly, goofy kiddie fare apart from that. I think it's important that happened with a lighthearted thing first.
Well, I think it's important too is that early on you have like your big tentpole things, but they're always one after another. They're never at the same time.
Yes.
Like you have your Batman 66, then you have your Christopher Reeve Superman, then you have your 4 Batman movies, whatever you want to call that franchise. You know what I mean? Like it's not like Batman and Superman were happening at the same time. One of those petered out and allowed the other one to reestablish the genre.
Yeah. Well, and it's clearly the reason that it takes a lot longer than a lot of fans thought it would before you get the novelty of the shared universe. And we think of that, not to get too far ahead of myself, but we think of that as such a, like, again, novel modern concept. But it's
like the breakout of Marvel in the 2000s.
We were sitting there in the 2000s
boom,
going,
boom,
why
boom.
aren't Spider-Man and Daredevil, Fantastic Four in the same universe? What is that about? And we were wondering why Batman and Superman couldn't be in a movie together. Not that I personally needed that, but a lot of people wanted that. And that's why you have that that futuristic thing in I Am Legend in 2007 with the poster. I think it's 07 with the fake logo with Batman and Superman on it. Like that was a big deal. That was one of the big things that everybody was talking about after that movie came out. It was like where is this? When does this finally happen? And
well, I'm sure that happened with Batman and Robin when he name dropped Superman.
Yeah, that's true. And there was weirdly that's one of the first like kind of crossover things, even though it's just mentioned. Isn't that odd?
Yeah.
And I read just today, I didn't know this, we're jumping everywhere. I read just today that apparently, as kind of a half joke, maybe he was hoping it would happen, Christopher Reeve pitched a cameo for himself in '89.
Oh, really?
And was laughed out of the room. Apparently.
Oh, that's sad.
I had never heard this.
I mean, it depends what it is, but...
Yeah. Like, he wanted to be in a cameo where like Superman is just flying through Gotham and he sees Batman like beating up criminals on the street or something, and he comes and he like helps for 5 seconds and then he leaves. Like I think it was something like that.
Yeah.
He's just passing through.
One, if we're going to talk about Superman and cameo stuff, again, one of the things that I've learned from watching Mark Millar's interview show, because he did one, I think this is from the Jeff Johns one, and Jeff Johns was an assistant to Richard Donner, and as a comic book person, he was, asking a lot of that questions, and Millar's a big Superman fan, so they talk about that stuff a lot, and that was the original script for Superman, was very much in the vein of the Adam West thing. Like he talks specifically about a joke where Superman's looking for Lex Luthor and he flies down and he grabs a bald man and he turns him around and he's like, oh, it's Telly Savalas, this big actor. that's the cameo. That's like your Adam West climbing up the building and the actor looks out the
They
window.
would have treated it like a window cameo, yeah.
Exactly, yeah. And there was a lot of stuff like that. And Donner came in and was like, no, like remove all of this. Like we need to treat this seriously.
Well, and that's why it's always felt to me like Gene Hackman was a little bit of a '60s Batman villain holdover.
Hmm. Well, it makes you wonder too with him, just because.
But it's like the only thing
Mhm.
that is like a little bit of residue
Yeah.
from the kind of corniness of, and I love him, and he does a great job in those. But I wonder how much of that was compromised on Donner's part, or if he actually conceived of it that way.
When I also wonder too, because we didn't have that like serious business Lex. Like that Lex is almost like a weird middle ground between what we would eventually get with Byrne and Wolfman and Silver Age Lex, where he's just a mad scientist.
Yeah, well, that's what Daniverse just said too. He says Gene Hackman was playing the Lex Luthor of the time. Yeah, that's true.
Mhm.
And like I never want to compare it to corporate tycoon Lex, more the Lex that's always got like a mass manipulation plot, but at the same time, he does feel more like a '60s Batman villain than you might have expected with the way the rest of that movie is handled, and with the way Zod is handled after that.
Yeah, no, and he's definitely more comedic relief in that movie,
Yeah,
which is I think why I like two better, because he works in that role better than just as the main villain.
yeah, I think so too. Where he's conniving, and it kind of needs that relief.
Hmm. Yeah, exactly. No, and
Uh,
he's a fun foil with
so,
Zod.
some of the Lester stuff notwithstanding, because Zod himself is not goofy, but things like Mount Rushmore absolutely are. Uh, but yeah, I want to. So let's backtrack for a second and go back to. Uh, we'll talk '60s a little bit, but first, I think we would be remiss to completely jump over the serials, because I think the serials are really important for a couple of reasons. Obviously, they're not. Theatrical features in the way everything else is that we're going to be talking about. So we're going to kind of treat this as a bit of a footnote, but they do help create interest in superheroes in general for adults as well as kids, because kids are the prime audience for those things, but they're watching them before a feature, so very often their parents and other adults are going to see some of that stuff. And so adults that never read comics, the only place in the 30s and 40s that they're gonna see anything to do with superheroes is going to be in the movie theater, with live action serials and with the Max Fleischer Superman cartoon. And you might have expected to see more of that treatment done for other superheroes, but it really didn't happen. It was really just Superman. Everything else was, you had very few cartoons that were serious, or at least relatively serious. Like those weren't comedies.
Yeah. Well, I'm trying to remember, because this is going to play into my point. It doesn't sound like it initially, but when the Superman versus Spider-Man Marvel DC crossover happens,
Yeah.
like mid 70s, it's like 75, I think, around there.
Yes, I had like 76, 77 in my
Yeah,
head.
it's like around
Maybe
there,
it's
right?
earlier. Yeah.
So when that was initially pitched, Stanley was like, "No, we're not going to reduce ourselves to that level." And Jerry Conway was like, "Okay, think about it like this, Stanley. Spider-Man is really popular in the comic world. Superman is known by everyone, and we don't even have the Donner movie at that point. But
Yeah.
like you had the shows, you had the serials, you had all this stuff. So like everybody knows it. So he pitched it to Stanley as, don't think of it like that. Think of it as Spider-Man is rising up to that level, and people will see that." So even mid 70s before Donner, like that's how much of a impact that stuff left on the public.
Yeah, what a good point. Because we always talk about, even to this day, maybe not as much right now, but to this day we talk about how movies kind of validate everything in the public in especially America. For our society, all the way through the 20th century, when you got a movie, now it was you'd hit the big time. Now you're validated. Now people pay attention to you, and that didn't happen with any of Marvel's properties until the 80s. With Howard the Duck, and nobody even knew that was a Marvel movie, and it flopped. So it didn't happen with any of their superheroes in any meaningful way, like as a big budget popcorn movie until 2002. Well, 2000 with X-Men.
And Blade,
I guess 98 with Blade, but how much did it matter to people that was Marvel? Like the first one that really matters is X-Men, and that's just astounding. Like, think about how many decades DC superheroes were in the zeitgeist because of extra media. I don't think that you can underestimate the importance of extra media to the impact that superheroes as an idea have had on the culture.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean,
and Superman permeates all of it. Like, it's not just movies. And again, remember, we just said, like, one of the first actual honest to God superhero movies is a Superman movie. But then the cartoons, the serials, like even radio, is everything.
Mm, yeah, exactly.
And it got to television first.
Well, I've always said, like, for me, the adaptations aren't so much for me, but it's nice that I can, because I like the comic side more. But the best thing about them is that I can walk up to my mom and have a conversation about Thanos, because she now know who that is.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, it is definitely very important to get your stuff out there.
Yeah. So it was obviously lopsided forever, and Marvel dominated, such as it was, television for a while, cartoons. In the 60s, and we won't make this all screen. We're going to talk primarily movies, but we'll have to, hit in and out of TV every so often. Because for the point we're making with Superman and Batman permeating the way they did. Like, Daniver says it was just Superman and Batman, maybe Wonder Woman, but that show was never that huge. But it was, but you're absolutely right. Like, those characters, Superman and Batman, stayed with the public and people that would never pick up a comic book for decades. And Superman especially. Superman had a TV show on, how many decades? It wasn't consecutive, but, like, Superman has a show on in the 50s, and then, late 50s into the 60s, and then in the 80s is Superboy. Not that anybody watched that show, but it was on for like 4 years, and in the 90s and 2000, and so how many decades overall does it have a show? And then when Superman doesn't have a show on, Batman tends to have something.
Yeah, well, then, because he also said, Wonder Woman wasn't that popular of a show, or wasn't that huge, I should say.
Not compared to Batman, but it was still pretty popular.
Like, you could definitely walk up to people and say Wonder Woman, and they'll at least know, like, the spin. Like, there's things that, like, permeated pop culture like that, in the same way that, like, Super Friends ruined Aquaman for decades.
Yeah. Well, and Wonder Woman was on around the same time as Incredible Hulk, so you had this unprecedented moment where you had a really popular DC and Marvel screen thing happening, and then on the big screen with Superman. And I don't think a lot of people were even correlating all of that too much, but there was certainly this feeling in the air, like, kids are getting into superheroes again, and there's stuff there for adults now too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. No, and I think that helped, because Wonder Woman's very campy, but then the Superman movie wasn't, and then the Hulk show isn't. So, like, you're breaking out of that 66 mold, and I think that really helped.
Yeah.
That you had more than one thing.
Yeah, that's a great point too, because then it's starting to look like superheroes, or at least things based on these comic books, can be more for adults, can be taken more seriously, and then ironically, people felt like that with everything but Batman.
Yeah, because it was it's something that we're seeing now today, that we got away from, and we're kind of getting back to it, which is that we had one actor that played Batman. Can we ever get past that? Will anybody ever accept, seeing that character in a different way?
Yeah. It's one of the oddest things I think that ever happened in pop culture, and I say this as a huge 60s Batman fan. I love that iteration, but it's very strange that for a whole generation we started there. We don't want to forget that there was an attempt at doing serious adaptation with the serials, both in 43 and in 47, and they have a lot of the staples of the comics, and you have a very no nonsense Batman in those. He's fighting mad scientists. He's not really fighting costume villains. He's fighting the same kind of bad guys that everybody in the serials were fighting. But he's got an Alfred. He's got a cave. He's got a Robin. He's got a car. Like all of that stuff is there, and from the beginning, if memory serves, from the 43, which I've never watched all the way through. I saw the 40. Is it 47 or 49? The second one.
Sure.
When I was a kid, I had on VHS.
But as I've always said, the 66 Batman show is very weird in its time, in that it's like the only one of those shows that actually used villains.
Yeah.
In the comics.
And that's a lot of why it was so popular, I think.
Because it took so long to get any of that.
Yeah. That's a great point, too, because even the Fleischer Superman cartoons, that was mostly mad scientists and robots.
Exactly. And that was Wonder Woman, and that was Hulk. Obviously, like, different things, like, it'll switch depending on what the show is.
Yeah.
But
the live-action Spider-Man show didn't do villains. It was pretty clear that if Doctor Strange had gone to series, it probably wouldn't have either.
The 270s Captain America movies don't have comic book villains. It was just what we did back then. Like, we had to get the heroes on, and then through time we could eventually get the other characters there too.
Yeah, real quick, the point I wanted to make about 60s Batman is that show, again, in a whole generation learning about Batman through that and becoming fans of that and the iconography and those characters, is that it was a parody of the thing it really was and became legitimately that thing for decades. And let me ask you this question, Austin. Do you think that, because you make a really great case for, look at all these other shows and the Superman movie that were aimed more at adults and could be more serious, but do you think that even still, with all of that, the popularity of campy Batman keeping us from getting to a serious Batman, because it absolutely did for as long as it did. I think you absolutely have Frank Miller to thank for the fact that it finally happened. Because that's what everybody was looking at when that movie was finally greenlit. Do you think 60s Batman held the whole genre back until we finally got to Tim Burton's Batman?
Oh, that's a hard question. Because it's like, how fair are you to the thing? Because I think to a degree, probably. But then, like I said, like, how fair is that 266 in and of itself?
Yeah.
But I think it definitely, helped. I'm gonna say it's like the 1-2 punch of that, and like, oh my god, I just referenced it. Super Friends. It's stuff like that, and probably like a little bit of Wonder Woman too. Like, there's probably enough things that made other studios go, yeah, I don't know. I think this is like that kid stuff. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And that's the expectation. So, A, they don't want to make that, but B, they don't think people would accept anything else.
Yeah, exactly.
Famously, Michael Uslan was trying to get Warner Brothers to make a serious Batman movie going all the way back to just after Richard Donner's Superman. So, like, from 80 or 81 on, he was working on that, and he starts as like this college graduate who gets I think maybe the first like like college course based on comic books to happen.
Mhm.
And then when and I forget what the university was, but when he was able to convince a university that that comics were serious enough, important enough literature to be in the curriculum, he then went after Warner Brothers and tried to produce a Batman movie, and it ended up working. But it was like from, like I said, 80, 81. They were like shopping the idea around and trying to get people interested in it, and it just took that whole decade. It took like 9-10 years, because or at least 7 or 8, and a lot of that is because of the conventional wisdom that it would have to be campy. And famously, there were pitches that were in a campier vein. And I think it's also really important to note, like, this is how, and again, I'm not throwing 60s Batman under the bus, because I love that iteration, but Austin and I somewhat recently did a whole Geeks Not Nerds show on stuff that's wonderful that ruined everything, and I think 60s Batman could be put in that. I forget if I brought that up, but I think, but I think that fits in that conversation, because it was so ingrained in the culture, in the zeitgeist, that how long did it take that franchise to degenerate into it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Absolutely.
Not very long. Arguably, Return starts to get us there in its way, in ways.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and with Returns, because like 89 still has that, and then obviously Returns bumps it up to 11. So yeah, I guess.
But 89 only still has any residue of campiness to you and I because we have the benefit of hindsight, right? When that comes out, everybody takes it dead serious.
Mm-hmm.
And when I say that Returns starts to, show some of those seams again, starts to get us to a little bit more of a campy place. I mean, like, it's got Penguin stealing the Batmobile. That's right out of 60s Batman.
Yeah. Yeah. When I just think back to, like, when I was a kid, even before Begins came out as a kid, like, 89 was never the serious Batman movie. It was always just, like, all 4 of these are kind of silly, and I can enjoy them.
But
so, like,
that's
I don't
what
know
I mean. It feels that way to us now, but if you've been there at the time, you wouldn't have had that. Because it's all by contrast. It's all by comparison.
Well, that's what I was saying, is like, I don't know if it's because of other things that had come out after, but I also didn't have like other more serious Batman things to compare it to.
Yeah.
Or 66, because I only knew those 4 movies as a kid.
Well, and that's part of my point too, is that if you had started with 60s Batman, by contrast, arguably 89 looks darker.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It certainly did to everybody that grew up with it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so I'm just saying that was the that was the attitude of the masses, most assuredly.
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely. And then where was I going with that? I don't know. I lost my train of thought. Sorry.
No, that's all right. So 60s Batman is I mean, like I said, I think it's maybe inarguably the most important big screen superhero thing that comes out, for better or worse, before Superman 78. And I think Richard Donner's Superman. And I think I've made this case, particularly with Batman stuff, for a long time, that like people to this day will sometimes still complain that because of 60s Batman, it took us as long as it did to get to real great serious Batman. But the big question is, and the argument I've always raised with this is, I don't know if it's hard to say whether you ever would have gotten it without 60s Batman. Like, again, for better or worse, how important was that for reinvigorating excitement and interest in superheroes as an idea.
Hmm. Well, and the big thing, especially with Batman, is 66 has that same thing that Superman has, where like the first two movies set, Lex and Zod as like the two villains to use, and 66 sets that like we've never moved away from the big four are, Joker, Catwoman, Penguin, and the Riddler.
Yeah, and the Batman has all of them,
Hmm. Yeah,
which
yeah,
I
exactly.
loved.
No, that's awesome.
Put them together again, but that's because that movie is doing something from everything, and that was its big. It felt like that was its big take from '60s Batman.
Mhm. Yeah, exactly.
Was let's get the what do they call that? They had a name for the cabal of villains in that movie. That
I've only seen it once, so
written
I'm
on the
not sure.
wall, and I'm forgetting. It's over there because I have a playset of it. I've got a diorama of it, and I can't.
Yeah, because you think of like comics and it's like Two-Face is definitely one of
Yeah,
the two, but I don't necessarily think of him that way in adaptation because we're still stuck on the original four from '66.
yeah. Except we do him in, but I do though because the character before he's Two-Face is in '89, and then forever does him.
Hmm. No, and
And so
that's
at
true.
least
We do
by
get
the
Harvey at least,
yeah,
but
at least by the time we start doing more adaptation of Batman, Two-Face is front and center right at the start.
well, you've only done Two-Face twice and never well is I think part of it too for me. Like I'm
Yeah,
still waiting for the good Two-Face Batman movie.
no, that's true. But of course, at that time when those came out, as I'm growing up, I'm also getting the really good Two-Face that we did in animated series. So
Mhm.
I
Yeah.
didn't feel like we had a lack of good
Well,
Two-Face.
that's another thing too is that he's been in two movies and he's always the secondary villain.
Yeah,
He's basically a henchman to Riddler in that movie.
but I like the way he's handled in Dark Knight better than you do.
I like Harvey. Their take on Two-Face himself isn't very good, but I
Sure.
like Harvey in that movie.
Let me backtrack a second, and well, actually, I want to just for a second go back to that point of whether or not '60s Batman is necessary to get to the kind of takeover that you get with superhero movies down the road on the whole, and it's impossible to say. You know, we talk what if with superhero history, movie history all the time because it's fascinating the way this all went and how easy it would have been for one project to crash everything. It's interesting to note that after the serials, so you have Batman and Superman. I think a lot of people forget that there was a Superman serial on top of the cartoons, and you've got Captain Marvel, and some other things I'm not thinking of. There's one or two other big ones. There's Captain America, I think, had serials.
Yes, I think so.
I don't remember if that was Republic or not, but I think it might have been. Anyway, so you have all that stuff. It's important to note that as popular as those were for kids at that time, it didn't lead to big screen serious superhero movies. And you might have thought maybe it would, right? Like, at the same time as James Bond is happening in the 60s, why aren't we getting a big budget Batman or Superman or Wonder Woman then?
Hmm. Yeah, like right in the middle of that popularity.
And that's where I get off saying, even if it was gonna, kind of hold us back for a while, 60s Batman might have been necessary.
Hmm.
And interestingly, it's also a parody itself of those serials. So the adults that grew up on that stuff when they were kids are remembering not just the characters, but the format.
Hmm. Yeah, exactly.
When we get into that TV show and that movie. And it kind of reinvigorates all of that, even though it's silly, even though it's campy, even though there's a lot of TV censorship that makes it almost a certainty that that's the way that would have been popular during that time. That was also kind of a weird lightning in a bottle moment where between 66 and 69 is maybe the exact only time in history that would have been that popular.
Hmm. Well, and then you also have to wonder if it wouldn't have been a hindrance if it wasn't for like the like really really quick downfall of that show, where like there's almost like a light switch that gets hit, right, where people are like, okay, yeah, we're kind of done with this. Like, you ran your course.
Yeah. And a lot of that is because, I mean, the show itself got stale for people, and if 1969 had not been a like really sad, horribly depressing year, in just in the world, with was it 68 or 69 with assassinations and
69.
the Vietnam War starting up and all of that, would it have maybe hung on another 2 or 3 years?
Mm-hmm.
And of course, famously, it was almost picked up by another studio, but they had already struck the sets. So I don't know if you know about that, but so,
I didn't know that. No.
Yeah, so there would have been a season 4 if only they hadn't already knocked down the Batcave.
See, this is why you gotta watch Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, because it's a love letter to that period on TV.
I need to finally do that. I just haven't gotten around to it. I want to. So that is a massive question to me. Is how necessary that is for this whole thing to even get started in the first place. Like, why James Bond and not Superman?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, America's always been looking for their James Bond franchise, I feel like, and they've never been able to land on one that's as successful as that is, where like it just keeps going.
Well, I guess it's interesting to note too that a lot of what reinvigorates fantasy films and action films is throwbacks to serial and to pulp stuff. So like, you could have had something like Indiana Jones in the 60s.
Yeah, absolutely.
You didn't. Now you had some fantasy stuff with stop motion. You had Harryhausen and things like that.
Yeah, well, and then that becomes interesting in terms of that, because you also almost had a Lord of the Rings in the 60s. So like, there's like whole boom we almost got. Yeah, with the Beatles as the Four Hobbits.
Weird. Okay, I don't know if I'd ever heard that.
Yeah.
But I think that's relevant to this discussion, to superhero history, because because you might think, well, you're not going to have the budgets and I mean, not even necessarily budget. Like you could throw the most money as possible at a big like tentpole movie in the 60s. Could you put something like Superman on screen, or later on like Silver Surfer and Galactus, and like are any of these things possible? But like, we were doing things just as ambitious as that with stop motion, with things like
Clash
of the Titans and the Odyssey and things like that.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, I was just thinking about
Jason and the Argonauts. Sorry, I was trying to think. I know stuff from the Odyssey was in a movie, but I can't remember what the movie, because I don't think it was called the Odyssey. What is
Jason and the Argonauts?
Is it just Jason and the Argonauts that has Scylla and Charybdis? It's been too long. I don't remember now.
But those are both great movies. And then obviously, because we're also in that 66 Batman point in time, we should also mention the Green Hornet was also on then too.
Right.
So you had like that as well. It's a big thing. And
importantly, took itself more seriously and only lasted a season.
Oh, is it that short?
Yeah.
Okay, I didn't realize that.
Maybe it was 2, I forget, but it of course didn't get anything like the ratings that Batman did. They were technically in the same universe. They had crossovers.
Really?
And
I didn't know that.
Oh, yes.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
The Green Hornet episode's great. Well, I think there's a 2-parter, and then I think there's a single part one where he comes back, but I could be wrong about that. It's been a long time since I've watched through that show. But it's the one I'm remembering is the one where the death trap turns people into cardboard cutouts. Which is wonderful.
That's pretty great.
It gets real meta. They do almost like a literal comic book thing where people get turned into flat images.
That's how that show ended. Batman became one, and he's in your basement.
That's how I got him.
Exactly.
Yeah, you didn't know about the Green Hornet crossover?
No, I didn't know
Oh
that.
boy, do I wish I had shown you that when we.
I also assumed that show lasted longer. I didn't realize it was so short.
I could be wrong about that, but I'm pretty sure it was just the one season. I know it got canceled earlier than Batman did.
Well, then Batman only lasted 3, and we think of it as, like this, like hugely pop. Not that 3 is like a short amount of time, but like comparatively to like how popular it was.
Well, yeah, I mean, it was certainly expected to go longer than that.
Mhm.
I mean, Star Trek held out for 3, and it was a fight every season. Batman did not have that. It didn't have any trouble getting renewed. It just couldn't stay on that last year. And but like Star Trek, it lost a lot of its budget in that last season, and I think it also got its schedules moved around. And of course, they had a lot of single part episodes because of that. This is supposed to be more about movies, but it's very difficult. And we haven't even talked that much about specifically that movie. We've been talking more about the TV show, but
Yeah, because I think I know the show more than I know the movie.
yeah. Well, in the movie itself, I don't think is extremely influential to the way superhero movies get made after that.
No, I don't think so.
You kind of
either.
have to lump the two together. Ultimately, I mean, there's kind of memey things that we remember from that will come up from time to time, like sometimes you just can't get rid of a bomb,
And everyone goes to shark repellent.
yeah, everybody goes to shark repellent. So that stuff shows up in the Lego Batman movie, but that's making fun of everything in Batman.
Yeah, exactly.
So in between 60s Batman and Superman 78, you have only a few things here and there, and a lot of it is pretty obscure and is kind of like exceptions that prove the rule, right? Like Hollywood is not interested in this as a subgenre of action. It's also interesting. Let me say this real quick too, that animation houses don't think to go to comics before they do.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and even with the subgenre thing, there wasn't even as much of it as you would think after Superman. Like,
Right.
there's a lot of it after Batman, but it's like, we had 4 Superman movies and a Supergirl movie that DC put out, and Swamp Thing.
Yeah, Swamp
Like-
Thing and its much maligned sequel, but I say maligned. I don't think anybody saw it. I've never seen that movie.
I know Connor loves it. That's all I know about that movie.
Yeah, no. Let me retract that. I don't even know if that movie is liked or not. I just don't hear people talk about it, so I assumed that it's not liked. But
I don't think anybody remembers
Nobody
either
remembers
Swamp
it.
Thing movie.
I did a rewind on it real early on, and I've never done the second one. I haven't, and I have been wanting to get that on a short list. But you and I will have to do the first one because obviously first. But
And the second one got a 4K release before the first one did.
what?
Yeah.
That's crazy.
The second one released I feel like about a year ago, and the first one only just came out like a few months ago.
Wow, I didn't know that.
So clearly somebody really needed to put that out. Somebody likes that movie.
Interestingly, you get some like smaller, almost B-movie type stuff, even from other countries based on comics, like Danger Diabolic. You get some kind of pulpy things that sort of count, that are like something like Danger Diabolic, like heavily, and that's an Italian film, but like heavily looking at other things in the movie zeitgeist right then as much as its own comic. So like that movie has a lot in common with James Bond, and would not happen probably, or at least the same way it does, because that character is insanely popular over there, even to this day. It's had TV shows and a recent movie and stuff, like, just in the last 10 years. But that I want to get my hands on, and it's hard to get, because I love Diabolic. I would love to get into more of that. And, weirdly, we even got a Fox 90s Diabolic cartoon, like, in the early 90s. Yeah. And I've seen some of it. The animation's pretty good. So there's weird little stuff like that. And then in the 60s, the late 60s, mid to late 60s into the 70s, you also get a lot of like weird like bootleg type stuff, or things that are not licensed. you and I did a weird like Spider-Man Captain America thing,
Captain America,
that Turkish movie, and then you had people in the 60s like stealing Batman and making their own movies, and so there was this. I bring that up to say there was an interest in it. There were filmmakers wanting to do it.
The greatest film of all time, Beyond the Valley of the Dolls. In the climax, they dress up like Robin and
That's right.
Superman and Tarzan.
I forgot Superman had a costume in that.
No, I said that. I think they call it Superwoman, and it's like not anything from what I remember. I can't remember. But,
I don't remember.
But Robin is just straight up Robin.
And what was that? 68?
Is it that early? I can't remember. I want to say that. Yeah. Possibly.
Beyond the Valley of the Dolls, it's definitely before 70.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, probably like 69, 68.
And then yeah, through the 70s, there's not much. And the main medium outside of comics that we're doing superhero stuff is TV, which we've already discussed. And a few of the movies that count for Superhero Rewind that happened in the 70s are actually TV pilots that don't go to series. So you have that with Doctor Strange. There's another one I'm not thinking of. I'm
not sure.
And
because I know that's not Captain America because they made 2 of them.
Right.
But I don't know.
And those I've still not seen. I'll have to do that at some point.
I'm excited for those.
We're gonna do commentaries on those at some point. Austin was threatening to put that on the poll recently.
Yeah, because I put both of them on as a double feature.
Hey, it wouldn't have beaten out Ninja Turtles.
It wouldn't have. No one would have voted for it.
And then, as you said, we're also real sparse during the 80s, and it's for exactly the reason that you brought up earlier, where Hollywood studios are just real timid to pull the trigger on that stuff because of what history there's been so far. But importantly, there's not much to go on. It's really hard to say how audiences would respond to any superhero material that was played straight right out of the comics. Like, if in the 80s you could have gotten a Fantastic Four or
if you
a
could have gotten
Spider-Man,
a Fantastic Four that looked like Ghostbusters, that would have sold.
Yeah. Like, I think any of those characters, and what I was going to say is just play them like the melodramas they were on the page, and let them be tongue-in-cheek in the sense that, like, the characters in the film take them seriously, but we know that what we're looking at is heightened and you know, kind of out there. But play it like serials did, you know, like let the characters totally play it straight. And that's exactly what the comics were doing. That's how Stan Lee wrote it. Instead of having everybody be wisecracking and trying to cast everybody as comedians, which seemed to be the conventional wisdom whenever these projects would come up in the 80s, right? We're going to have a Batman with a Robin who's played by Eddie Murphy, you know, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Which does make sense to an extent, because, like, when you're making a movie or a show or whatever, Robin is going to be your comedic relief. It's like, I can understand why they went with or why they were talking about that.
Yeah.
That's maybe too far into that realm. But I can understand that on paper why you would say that, because that is that would be his function.
Yeah, I never got that, and I guess I just always assumed that if that's your Robin, your Batman was, because I forget. I thought it was always like pairing 2 comedians. I didn't think Batman was ever a straight man. I thought it was always like, you know, like Robin Williams or somebody. But
I know Robin Williams was talked for. I want to say they were talking about him with Joker, and then more seriously with Riddler. But I don't know about that for sure.
No, I remember that too. And I'm not even saying that was specifically something that was kicked around, but I thought.
But no, they talked about it with Bill Murray as Batman.
There it is. That's who I was trying to think of. Yeah, so that's why I never really bought into your argument with it, because it wasn't like Robin would be comic relief character. It would be a comic duo.
Well, and I always forget about the Bill Murray Batman thing, and then I always just assume it's that movie, like it's Michael Keaton Batman, and then they were talking about having Robin, and then that gets dropped at some
Yeah,
point.
no, that was all before Tim Burton was ever even on a project that was kicked around, and I think a lot of the reason that it took so long to get to '89 was because the producers didn't want to go that way, and I think maybe those were and this is where my knowledge is foggy, and somebody can maybe help me, but I think that those were always like studio ideas, like studio heads throwing stuff out, like that sounds like the kind of nonsense John Peters would throw at you.
Yeah, probably.
Right. So you have Uslan trying to get this movie made, and then that kind of thing gets thrown at him, and he's like, okay, well we can't go with these idiots because they want to make Bill Murray Batman, and I'm sure that wisdom comes directly after Ghostbusters also.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
Because in interesting ways, Ghostbusters both does and doesn't show you how to make a superhero movie. Like, I think that's a movie that's maybe worth mentioning just in passing here, because obviously that's not a superhero movie, but it has a lot of the hallmarks that your biggest superhero movies after it will have. And movies like
the last two reboots, and obviously the last one's not exactly a reboot, but it's the biggest thing that both of them have struggled with, is how much of it is just a straight comedy and how much of it is that kind of action movie.
Yeah, and superhero thing. And a lot of that now is because the superhero genre has taken over, so a lot of action things struggle with just stealing that formula and degenerating into a giant CG fight in the third act. And that kind of thing. But would it be going too far to say that movies with like fantasy weapons that are easy to turn into toys and cars that you can make toys out of that everybody remembers have something to do with what eventually becomes the superhero genre, right? Like, does Ghostbusters and Back to the Future and movies like that not also kind of help audiences get kind of ready for something like Batman?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
Even though those are comedies, but
well,
certainly taking themselves more seriously than something like Adam West Batman.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'd say the Batmobile is more important to film than it is comics, because every Batman adaptation has to have the big Batmobile scene, and car chases just don't look good in comics, so you don't get a lot of that in Batman comics.
Well, and it's also important to note how important, I can't believe I said it like that. It's also important to note that merchandising really mattered for 60s Batman, and that was very unprecedented. And then the exact same thing happens with 89 later, but in between that, particularly through the 80s, you've got the Saturday morning cartoon boom that kind of proves to you this massive, like, secondary revenue stream that you can get out of a superhero movie in selling it to kids, even if adults also want to go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, absolutely.
And so that ends up being a big boon to what will eventually become that genre. It's very interesting, and I'm not saying that this is why we don't have major superhero movies between Superman 78 and Batman 89, but it's interesting nevertheless that Superman does not have that kind of merchandising.
Yeah, when a lot of that 80s cartoon stuff is very, like, superhero coded.
Yeah,
like,
that's kind of what I'm getting at. Yeah,
obviously you got your He-Man, and then, like, Transformers was like Transformers and G.I. Joe in the 80s was basically designed by Marvel in terms of its story working.
Yeah.
So, like when we did the Transformers movie, the main villain is Transformers Galactus, like a lot of the big hallmarks of Marvel. And like your GI Joe versus Cobra thing is your Shield versus Hydra. Like there are very clear parallels that you can look at with both of those things.
And even the Ghostbusters cartoon was sold like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So again, clearly not a superhero team by definition. They're anti-heroes. They don't know what they're doing. They're more out for themselves than they are for anybody, particularly, Bill Murray's character. But toyetic and a clear good guy versus bad guy situation, really easy to turn that into a cartoon show.
And a lot of big, colorful, like, super villains you can have.
Yeah.
Too. Mm-hmm.
So it's interesting how we got there, because I haven't thought about this a ton, but just the importance of Ghostbusters as a franchise for superheroes, even though they're not superheroes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I've never really thought about paralleling that, but absolutely.
And then Ninja Turtles helps from the merchandising standpoint, because it does the same thing Ghostbusters does, except that actually is bona fide superhero. And then 3 years later, it gets the next biggest movie after Batman. And how weird is it that for a while there, your 3 biggest superhero movies of all time are Superman, Batman, and Ninja Turtles?
Yeah, that is crazy.
But I'm right?
Yeah. Well, and then obviously one of the big things that we're missing out here for your boom and independent stuff is you also get RoboCop in this period, which also got the cartoon thing.
Yep.
And was very toyetic in that way, and was very much looking at Frank Miller. So you have that Batman connection.
Yeah, and it's so weird after '89 looking back at it, because I can't say how influential RoboCop can really be on Batman, considering how long of a pre-production that had and everything. But
they're both so looking at Frank Miller.
Yeah, and there's something really in the air with the way that's made, and both of them are very influential on movies made into the 90s, both superhero and kind of superhero adjacent.
Mm-hmm. Well, we talked about this recently on the last Rewind, but there's like a clear RoboCop thumbprint on the original Ninja Turtles movie.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, absolutely.
And if you watched those two movies, if you watched RoboCop in '89 and you didn't know which one came first, I think arguably it would be difficult to tell.
Yeah, I can see that.
What I mean is, one could easily have influenced the other one, and you wouldn't know which one that was.
I think what helps is that RoboCop is very 80s, and 89 is trying not to be, but it sneaks its way in there.
Yeah.
So I think that helps it where it's hard to judge them in that way.
Well, and the last thing I did on '89, because every so often I have to do a dissertation on that movie again, I found myself talking a lot, if memory serves anyway, about how it is both a consummate 80s and 90s movie simultaneously. Like, there's not a better transition from one decade into another than Batman '89.
Interesting. Yeah, I've never thought of it as being like super 90s, but I can also, well, I think what helps with that is it sequels that like help transition it too.
Well, and I say that too because it's so influential on what we make through the 90s that it like I can't help but feel a 90s flavor in it, because and that's why it's such a weird kind of transition point, because like it's '89 and it's a Prince soundtrack and it's got 80s hair and all of that, but then we can't get away from it for years. So like it's so influential it feels 90s because it helped to create what the 90s were. No way around it.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
And certainly Returns feels much more like a clear, it could not have been made in any other decade than the 90s.
Yeah, absolutely.
Particularly with the way it deals with women.
No, you are right.
Well, because right there was this kind of
No,
Oh,
because I was
amusing
like
overcompensating
misremembering
thing. When
things.
when
Yeah.
when she goes, "You couldn't. I'm a woman." I'm like, I don't think you do that 3 years before
No,
this.
I started to question it, and then I got hit by every memory of every moment of,
Yeah,
and I went, "No, you are
they
correct.
force it so hard. It's like, yep, this is 1992. There's no other year this possibly could have come out.
I'm a woman." Ugh.
Exactly. Okay, we have one more minute, and
Are
I
we
need
just
to
gonna do the 66 dance for that minute?
and I need to read through super chats. So what I'm thinking is, we'll kind of wrap this up, and then I'll read the super chats after the timer's over. So we'll kind of cheat
That's what I figured.
with that, if that's okay. And I was going to look at comments more as we went, but I found that this was getting kind of dense, so it was kind of difficult to go back and forth. But no, dense in a good way.
I'm sure. Okay.
So we are. I think we've done a pretty good job getting up to 89. Although I think when we do a part 2, we should maybe backtrack and hit the specific entries of the 80s more, because we haven't really talked about the Superman franchise
We definitely have to do more on Superman.
on
The
the
only thing I
whole.
have left to say about Swamp Thing
Yeah.
is it's one of those adaptations we will never see again because it was made before the Alan Moore thing run, sorry, and you'll never see a adaptation of that material without that peeking in.
Sort of like doing Lex Luthor before he's what we know him now.
It's Lex Luthor and Donner, and it's Spider-Man in the 60s cartoon, where his love interest is Betty Brant. It's stuff like that.
Oh, yeah.
It's like we made it at specific points that made it the way it is, and we'll never see it like that again.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, like, Batman with Vicky Vale a little bit. Like, occasionally we bring her back in other material, but, like, that was kind of a moment in time where we were doing a love interest thing with Vicky Vale in the comics, but she's one of many. She's not like a...
Yeah, I don't think of Batman as having a definitive love interest.
Yeah,
I
me
mean,
neither. Sorry, I'm just sitting here
people-
trying to come up with other examples of this because it's so interesting. Like the things where you're just in that moment in time.
Yeah. Oh, one of them I would say is probably the Ninja Turtles thing with Splinter, but it's how much of that is just that we never went back to that.
What about it?
Just the fact that we've never gone back to that origin. So like we keep changing it, and we'll never. I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, that's why I said maybe like.
Yeah, well, the only well, I didn't even know what you were talking about for a second, because the only reason I hesitate with that is it seems like there's this concerted effort every time we do Ninja Turtles to like reinvent the wheel.
Yeah,
Or at least
that's probably
reinvent part of it. So yeah, I mean, we don't go back to just straight up Mirage often enough. I'm forgetting what he is in the 2012 cartoon. But I think in the 2003 show, he probably is just a rat, because that's taking so much from Mirage.
Well, that's cool then. I take my point back.
Yeah. No, I was just sitting here going like, I know there's
I
other
was
places we
struggling to
do
think of
it. It's just you don't know Ninja Turtles as well.
Yeah, no, and I was struggling to think of examples, and I was like, maybe that's one. I don't know. But there's definitely other stuff like that.
But yeah, so beginning of the next part that we do on this, we'll want to do kind of a more detailed history of Superman. We'll want to hit Howard the Duck a little bit.
Oh, of course. How could I forget my favorite superhero film?
I put a pin in it, but we didn't actually really discuss it and why it bombed and why it didn't do anything to help us get into more superhero movies after it. Although arguably, even if it was successful, it wouldn't have, because it looks like a superhero movie, but it doesn't look like a superhero movie. So
well, that's too much of just Lucasfilm and Star Wars stuff.
Yep.
Yeah.
Bob the Hun, $5 super chat. And like I said, sorry we didn't get to these as we went along, but we got into a bit of a groove here. Superman 78 got people asking Stan Lee at cons when a Spider-Man movie would come out, like the Superman film. It got worse after 89. Yeah, of course. And that's a big part of this that we haven't really talked a lot about, that we just kind of also put a pin in. Like the fact that during this whole time, all the way up to 89 and beyond, Stan Lee is constantly shopping around
Specifically Ant-Man.
Marvel movies. Yeah, specifically Ant-Man. We
All
also
back to the 60s.
I'll try to touch on this next time if I remember it, but it's also important to note that there are Marvel movies that get made around this time, but they're not big budget blockbusters. So you do get 89 Punisher, which is not as bad as people think it is, and you get, it's not great either. Dolph Lundgren is almost always miscast, and then you get the 1990 Captain America movie, you get the unreleased 1994 Fantastic Four. So like there were attempts at stuff, but to something you brought up toward the beginning of this, there's also that problem that the rights were splintered among all these different companies for so many Marvel things.
When I think Stanley was just so desperate to get a lot of this stuff off the ground because
he made bad deals.
That he made bad deals, because I've always said that Stanley is one of those guys where he did a lot of good for the comic book industry from being ashamed of working in the comic book industry.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Like... Well, what we think of as the golden age of his career starts just after he seriously considered retiring.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. Well, that's why he used, a pseudonym for his name instead of just his full name, was so that he could go off and do books or whatever when the time came.
Yeah,
and he wouldn't be connected to that anymore.
Yeah, he famously claimed that he couldn't tell people what he did for a living at parties without getting like laughed off the floor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
Because people, and I tend to believe that. Like,
I agree with that. Yeah. No, and like I said, he did a lot of good for the comic book industry, but it did come from that place of, I want to be seen as like an important writer and like not have that, which is very good, but like, I do think it comes from as a place of shame.
Yeah, which is sad.
Yeah, absolutely. That's not me being critical of the man. That is what happened.
Chewbacca's Lover, $10 super chat. From what I understand, there were... Oh, I'm sorry. My comments just popped down. From what I understand, there were supposed to be Batman shorts like the Superman ones by Fleischer, but there was a rights snafu. There wasn't a Batman radio show for the same reason. I've never heard that, and now I want to look into that. Yeah, maybe it was Chewbacca's Lover or somebody else before we started broadcasting that was bringing up the question of why we didn't get more Batman stuff at the same time as Fleischer Superman, and I never really
cartoons.
Say that again.
I had heard that they wanted to do cartoons, but I didn't know about the rights issue. I wonder if that's they signed them away for whatever serial or something, or like a project that never happened, and that's the reason why. Maybe.
Yeah, it never occurred to me that it's odd that Batman didn't get a radio show, considering. But yes, of course, because considering how popular Superman was, but especially The Shadow, Batman taking so many cues from the show, being so influenced by that character, you'd think that would be an obvious, place to take that character. I never questioned Batman not getting, theatrical cartoons though, because we didn't do a lot of stuff like that. I mean, I'm not saying that there were never any like somewhat darker cartoons, but like they were still generally comedic, and Superman already was doing the like more, he didn't always fly, like he was doing the somewhat more crusader thing. So it might have looked like kind of repeating yourself, but also I don't know how well it would, if there would be a worry that wouldn't play great for audiences, at that time, like that it's not colorful, that it's more of a noirish sort of thing. Obviously, it would have been awesome. Like I wish it had happened, but but I never questioned it. It made a lot of sense to me that didn't get made.
Yeah. Well, imagine like a Batman cartoon that looks like, I don't know, like Disney's Headless Horseman or something.
Oh yeah,
that would have been pretty sweet. Chewbacca's Lover also added in the comments, he said it was some type of bad deal that Bob Kane made. So similar to what happened to Stan Lee, I
Yeah.
guess.
Well, and it's important to note that it's so easy in hindsight to look back and go, some of these deals were really obviously kind of bad. But we're talking about, especially in the 30s and 40s with Bob Kane. However you feel about Bob Kane, we're talking about the earliest days of taking things to screen.
Mm-hmm.
And so all this stuff is unprecedented. It would be very difficult to even know what a good deal looks like.
Yeah, I know specifically with Stan Lee
And you have so few options of who to take stuff to.
Exactly, yeah. I know specifically with Stan Lee, and I'd imagine it was probably something similar with this Bob Kane thing if this happened. Was I think somebody came to him and was like, "Hey, sign away like your merchandising and whatnot rights, and I'll make stuff for you guys, and we'll have this deal." And like in the fine print, it was like, there's no obligation to actually make any of it, and that was where they got screwed. Obviously, was he was just a guy coming in to be like, "Pay me for this thing. Okay, now I hold the rights for it for like 2 years. Bye."
Oh no! Well, look, somebody has to make these mistakes so that people know not to do that stuff later.
Exactly.
Josh says that Batman and Superman first crossed over in radio, which, now that you say that, I had heard that. And that means that Batman must show up somewhere in the Superman radio show, but didn't get his own, which makes it even more curious.
Yeah, that is interesting.
Josh also put in a $10 super chat and says, kind of similar to Chewbacca's Lover, I wonder what would have happened if we had adapted superhero comics into animated movies during the 40s and 30s. That would have been fascinating to see. And imagine if big houses like Disney adapted superhero comics back then.
Mm-hmm.
It's not crazy to think that could have happened.
Imagine a world where you get, because we're talking about the 30s and 40s, a world where you have like a Batman Universal Monsters type movie. That would have been awesome.
It sure would have. And it's always hard to immediately say like, oh, I wish this had happened, or I wish this other thing had happened, because then it changes the timeline that you have, and then you might miss some of the great projects that you did end up getting.
Mm-hmm.
Changes the whole trajectory.
Maybe there's a dimension or a universe where Universal makes a Batman movie, and we get Bela Lugosi as Batman, and then in the 60s they go, I don't know about this campy Batman.
Yeah.
Will anyone take it seriously after Bela Lugosi Batman?
Well, what if
he doesn't have his accent?
Well, and think about how long it took before like intercompany crossovers became all the rage. What if the Batman Godzilla movie had happened in the 60s? Mm-hmm. That almost happened.
Yeah,
how does that change things?
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, what if... I mean, think about the fact that you have almost no superhero movies whatsoever, and one of the first ones would have been Batman and Godzilla, of all things. Now, it could have just been a throwaway, silly crossover, like a lot of the Godzilla movies were for a lot of people, with other monsters, but Batman's not a monster. I mean, it's different.
But does that end up being like Godzilla versus King Kong, because it's like the big American icon versus the big Japanese icon?
Yeah,
in that same way.
Yeah, and then
do you, like 40 years later, have people going, when are we going to get a remake of Batman versus Godzilla?
Yeah, or forevermore, because the big difference between something like Kong and Batman is Kong doesn't have comics that come out every month. So Godzilla could then, whether you continue to have the rights to be able to do with it anything with it or not, a part of Batman's mythology in the minds of fans for decades.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
Godzilla just ends up being thought of as a Batman character for people, or Batman is thought of as a Godzilla character for people.
Well, and then is it like King Kong, where does then Toho in Japan get the rights to Batman, where they get to make their own solo Batman movies like they did with King Kong? These are the important questions.
Yeah. Josh also says
Batman escapes.
that Brad Bird wanted to do The Spirit in the 80s, which I had never heard.
Interesting.
There was a Spirit TV movie, though, in, I think, the 80s.
Hmm.
Was it that early, or was it early 90s? I'm pretty sure it was in the 80s. Or maybe
I'm not sure. I don't know anything about
maybe
that.
early 80s, but I don't know if that's ever been released. I've never seen it.
Mhm.
So there's a lot of these really tiny projects that people don't know about. Like we didn't bring up the Superman musical in '75 that was put on TV.
Which I quote a lot, like way more than anyone on the planet.
Well, besides me and my wife, because we still quote that quite a bit.
And I
You
only know
mean
it
to
from
say that Superman would destroy himself?
I always quote the what is it where he's like, "You may be wondering why I want to take over the world, so I can destroy Spain."
Is it Spain or is it Sweden?
No, it's Spain.
Is it Spain?
I had a whole thing for years where I made fun of wanting to destroy Spain because of that musical.
And like the camera move they keep doing?
Yeah, it's
Because that was like he had a whole list that leads up to it.
I think it's like, you may wonder why I want to destroy Superman, so that I can take over the world.
And the reason I want to
Hey,
take over the
what-
world, yeah, he turns to another camera.
You may wonder why I want to take over the world, so I can destroy Spain. And then I don't remember if there's anything after that. But
It's brilliant. It's perfect.
yeah.
It's not perfect. Josh has another $2 super chat. I will go on record and say I love Danger Diabolic. Well, you are not alone, sir, and I'm excited to get Austin to finally watch that someday.
Yeah, that'd be exciting.
Because we'll do a commentary on it. I think you'll like that.
Yeah, I don't know anything about it, except that you love it, so
He's got Batcave.
that is cool.
He's got a really cool Batcave. and he rolls around in money naked with his super hot girlfriend in his Batcave.
Oh, like DuckTales.
Just like that. I think that's all the super chats.
I think so too, if I remember correctly.
All right. Well, everybody, thanks a bunch for watching this. I hope you enjoyed it. And I feel like we got a decent amount done in that first hour. As we got to about the 45-minute mark, I was like, you know what? I don't want to go past 89 tonight.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, I want to be careful and not start like getting into Batman movies yet. Maybe the whole next hour will just be Superman and Batman. I could totally see that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, quite possibly. There's a lot of stuff to talk about just with Superman.
Yeah. But this has been a lot of fun. It's been like a memory lane kind of thing for me.
Yeah, no, this was a fun time.
Folks, hope you enjoyed it. We will be back again. I don't have a date set for this yet. It could be probably a couple weeks, because we're gonna do a rewind commentary next week. So we'll probably stave it off at least one more week. But we'll try not to put too much distance in between these, so that we don't forget what we discussed last time. Austin, unless you're thinking, no, we need to hurry up and come back, or I'm not gonna remember what we talked about.
All I'll need to remember is start at Superman. Stupid.
Start at Superman.
Just text me that.
Don't forget about Howard the Dog.
Yeah.
Gotta get into
how
that.
Could I ever?
I want to say thanks to our patrons for all the support, and super chatters tonight as well. Really appreciate you guys. If you would like to become a member of the Superhero Rewind Selection Board, also known as a Superhero Rewind producer, you can go to patreon.com/geekvolution, and the $10 tier gets you access to that. We've got a Discord. We hang out monthly or around monthly. You get your name read at the end of the show. Sometimes you get to help us pick things for the show, and I take feedback from these guys all the time about what we're doing here on Superhero Rewind of the Commentary Project. So thanks, and as I said, you get your name read very dramatically by me at the end of every episode. And so thanks to all of you guys, but especially one reply, Bill Mills. You know what, I said I was going to start at the bottom next time, so I'm going to do that. So you're not even going to believe who we're going to hear first.
Oh, we got to start with this trash? Come on now.
I don't say that, man. Do you know how long he's been a producer? I've been saying his name at the end since August of 2020.
I like to think he just doesn't watch the show specifically anymore because he's like, oh man, I get made fun of at the end of every episode.
Or like he completely forgot that he was even a patron. It's like he doesn't even watch Geevolution anymore.
Yeah, like
but we're still charging his card, and he has no idea that his name is at the end of every episode.
Exactly.
No, really though, Zach, we appreciate you, man. Thanks to Zach, Wendell Jones, Unknown Passenger, This Guy, The Day Ghost, Miguel Rodriguez, Michael Austin Gulick, Matthew Brody, Kareem Roberts, Justin Hayes, Jonathan Campbell, Jacob Schneider, Hot Soup, Damon Begay, Adam March, Super Billy, Stone Gassman, Michael Martin, Matt Bat 68, Joe Gira, Joe Turner, Hayden Spring, Elliot Slater, Dr. Hello, Chewbacca's Lover, Bill Mills, and One Reply. You guys got your name said twice. Next.
One Reply. Just gotta make fun of whoever the last person is.
God,
reply more than once if you have to.
Next Friday night, Austin and I, if everything goes according to plan, are going to watch and discuss The Shadow from 1994. And Austin has a different schedule now, so we're not having to start as late. So we'll start probably 9 o'clock Central Time, if not a little bit earlier. So once again, look forward to that, and then we'll be back with the second part of this in likely a couple of weeks, unless we get cold feet about it and we decide we better hurry up and do it or we'll forget everything. Thanks once again, guys. We'll see you again next time. And Austin, really appreciate you, man.
Yeah, no, this was a lot of fun. Thanks for having me.
Of course. I was Captain Logan. This was The Day Ghost. Bye, everybody.
See ya.